Today we ask one of history's most critical questions. When the Roman Empire, the system that held the Western world together, collapsed, what happened to faith? To understand how Christianity survived the chaos, violence, and societal breakdown that followed, you must stay with us until the very end. Please like and subscribe to support our historical investigations. The event we often cite as the fall of Rome is the deposition of the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, in 476 CE. But this was not a single event. It was the final, almost quiet, conclusion to a century-long process of disintegration. The Western Roman Empire had been hollowed out by internal political decay, economic stagnation, and relentless pressure from migratory peoples, often labeled barbarians by the Romans. The Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Lombards did not just attack the empire. They moved in, settling vast territories and establishing their own kingdoms on the skeleton of the old Roman provinces. With the removal of the emperor, the fragile illusion of a unified Western political structure vanished completely. The immediate consequence was chaos and fragmentation. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace that had guaranteed safe travel and commerce across the Mediterranean for centuries, was shattered. Roman roads, the arteries of the empire, fell into disrepair. With no centralized army to police them, they became perilous, infested with bandits and competing warlords. Trade networks that connected Britain to Egypt and Spain to Syria collapsed. Aqueducts that supplied water to the great cities crumbled from neglect. As a result, the sprawling urban centers of the Roman world, cities like Rome, Trier, and Milan, began to shrink dramatically. Their populations fled the lack of food, security, and sanitation, seeking survival in the isolated, self-sufficient rural estates, latifundia, of wealthy landowners. The sophisticated, interconnected Roman world was devolving into a fragmented landscape of isolated, localized settlements. This political and infrastructural collapse created an immense power vacuum. The Roman state apparatus, the legions, the tax collectors, the governors, the prefects, simply disappeared. The complex bureaucracy that had administered law, collected taxes, and maintained public order vanished. For the average citizen, the question was simple and brutal. Who is in charge? Who will protect us from the marauders? Who will administer justice? Who will feed the poor now that the state-sponsored grain dole, annona, is gone? In this vacuum, only one institution remained that was literate, organized, wealthy, and present in nearly every city: the Christian Church. For the previous century, the Church had grown within the Roman system, mirroring its administrative structure. Each city, civitas, had its episkopos, bishop, who oversaw the clergy and laity in his diocese, a term borrowed from Roman administration. While the secular Roman governors fled or were killed, the bishops stayed. They were often the only remaining figures of authority, drawn from the old senatorial, educated Roman elite. They were literate in a world that was rapidly losing literacy. They controlled the church's growing lands and wealth, and they administered the only functioning welfare system, distributing food and alms to the desperate urban poor. The bishop effectively inherited the responsibilities of the defunct Roman government. He became the defensor civitatis, defender of the city. We have historical records of bishops like Germanus of Auxerre or Lupus of Troyes organizing city defenses, repairing walls, and, most importantly, acting as diplomatic negotiators, meeting directly with barbarian leaders like Attila the Hun or the Gothic warlords to plead for their cities to be spared. They were the crucial link between the old, dying Roman world and the new, emerging Germanic kingdoms, offering stability, continuity, and a sense of divine order in an age of profound uncertainty. While the bishops in the cities struggled to maintain the last vestiges of Roman administration, another, more isolated movement was becoming the primary safeguard of both faith and knowledge in the chaotic countryside: monasticism. As the urban centers became dangerous and economically unviable, many devout Christians sought spiritual purity by withdrawing from the fallen world entirely. This movement had its origins in the desert fathers of Egypt and Syria, like Saint Anthony, who practiced extreme asceticism. However, for monasticism to survive and thrive in the collapsing West, it needed structure and moderation. This structure was provided by Saint Benedict of Nursia, around 529 CE. Ironically, just as the Byzantine Emperor Justinian was closing the last pagan philosophical schools in Athens, Benedict founded his monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy. It was here he wrote his Regula, Rule of Saint Benedict. The rule was a masterpiece of spiritual and practical organization, a guide for communal living that balanced the divine work, prayer, opus Dei, with manual labor and study, ora et labora, pray and work. This was revolutionary. It rejected the extreme, solitary self-denial of the desert hermits in favor of a disciplined, self-sufficient, and stable community. In a world defined by violence, fragmentation, and uncertainty, the Benedictine rule offered a blueprint for order. Monasteries became islands of stability, predictability, and peace in a sea of chaos. The most profound historical contribution of these monasteries was a direct result of this stability: the preservation of knowledge. One of the key tasks assigned to monks under the rule was intellectual labor, specifically the copying of texts. In the monastic scriptorium, writing room, monks embarked on the painstaking, multi-year process of hand-copying manuscripts. Their primary duty, of course, was the preservation and duplication of the Bible and the writings of the Church Fathers, like Augustine and Jerome. However, in the process, they also preserved the last surviving copies of the classical pagan world. Works of Roman literature, Virgil, Ovid, Cicero, and even Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, often in Latin translation, were copied and stored in monastic libraries. These monks, often unaware of the full significance of their labor, became the accidental gatekeepers of Western civilization. Without the scriptorium, the intellectual foundations of the later Renaissance would have been entirely lost, as the original papyrus scrolls disintegrated and were not replaced. Furthermore, these monasteries were not just passive libraries. They were dynamic economic and technological centers. The work, labora, part of the rule meant that monks were required to make their communities self-sufficient. They became masters of agriculture, clearing dense forests, draining swamps, and experimenting with crop rotation. They operated the most advanced technology of the age, such as water mills for grinding grain. They provided hospitality to pilgrims and travelers, as inns had disappeared, offered medical care, using knowledge from preserved texts, and acted as centers of local charity, distributing food during famines. Finally, in remote regions like Ireland, which had never been part of the Roman Empire, monasticism took on a unique, fiercely ascetic, and scholarly form. Irish monks, like Columba and Columbanus, became the great missionaries of the early Dark Ages, famously reintroducing not just Christianity, but also classical learning, back into pagan Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish kingdoms, establishing new monastic centers that would seed the continent's intellectual recovery. While monasteries preserved knowledge in isolated rural communities, the survival of faith as a public, organized force in the new kingdoms of Europe required a different strategy: political engagement. In the power vacuum left by the Western Emperor, the single most significant institution that grew to fill this void was the Papacy, the office of the Bishop of Rome. While all bishops held local authority, as discussed in Bolemai, the Bishop of Rome claimed a unique, preeminent authority derived from the doctrine of apostolic succession, arguing he was the direct spiritual heir of St. Peter, the rock upon which Christ built his church. In the 5th and 6th centuries, this spiritual claim began to take on a powerful secular, political dimension. There was no longer an emperor in Italy, and the Byzantine, Eastern, emperor's control from Constantinople was weak and intermittent. The city of Rome itself was vulnerable, repeatedly sacked and later threatened by other groups like the Lombards. Into this void stepped activist popes, most notably Pope Gregory the Great, reigned 590 to 604 CE. Gregory was, in essence, the last Roman aristocrat and the first medieval pope. He acted as a secular ruler. He used church lands and revenues to organize the food supply for Rome, paid troops to defend the city walls, and acted as a diplomat, negotiating treaties directly with the invading Lombards, completely bypassing the absent imperial authorities. He demonstrated that the papacy was no longer just a spiritual office. It was a political power capable of governing, protecting, and administering territory. This fusion of spiritual authority and temporal power would define the medieval papacy. However, the Pope's centralized power could not save Christianity alone. The faith's survival was ultimately dependent on the second great strategy, the conversion of the new barbarian kings. The Goths, Franks, Vandals, and Anglo-Saxons were now the military and political masters of the West. If these new rulers remained pagan, or worse, remained Arian Christians, a competing heresy that rejected the full divinity of Christ, the Catholic Church, its bishops, and its monasteries would eventually be marginalized or destroyed. The Church's survival depended on its ability to co-opt its conquerors. The pivotal, game-changing event was the conversion of Clovis, king of the Franks. Around 496 CE, Clovis's wife, Clotilde, was a Catholic princess who urged him to convert. Facing defeat in battle, Clovis allegedly prayed to the Christian god, promising to convert in exchange for victory. He won, and he and 3,000 of his warriors were baptized. This was a strategic masterstroke for both sides. For Clovis and the Franks, converting to Catholicism rather than the Arianism of their Visigoth rivals immediately allied them with the vast, educated Gallo-Roman population they now ruled. It gave Clovis access to the Church's literate administrative class, the only literate people left, to run his kingdom and, most importantly, gave his military conquest the stamp of divine legitimacy. He was no longer just a warlord. He was a Christian king, a protector of the faith. For the Church, it gained its most powerful military protector in the West. The alliance between the Frankish monarchy and the papacy would shape the next 500 years of European history, providing the Church with this sword it needed to defend itself and expand its influence. This model was repeated across Europe. In Spain, the Visigoth kings converted from Arianism to Catholicism. In England, Pope Gregory the Great sent St. Augustine of Canterbury, not to be confused with Augustine of Hippo, as a missionary to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons. Faith survived not just by hiding in monasteries, but by actively converting, educating, and integrating the new political masters of the fallen Roman world. While the Catholic Church in the West navigated the chaos by converting barbarian kings and establishing the political authority of the papacy, the experience of the Christian faith in the rest of the former Roman world followed profoundly divergent paths. The collapse of the West did not mean the collapse of the entire Roman civilization. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, centered in Constantinople, survived and often flourished for another 1,000 years. In the East, the story was one of continuity and control. The emperor remained the supreme political authority, ruling over both state and church. This system, known as Caesaropapism, saw the Byzantine emperor viewed as God's direct representative on earth, presiding over ecumenical councils and issuing doctrinal decrees. Unlike the Pope, the Eastern patriarchs were politically subservient to the imperial authority. The faith in the East survived the Roman collapse not because it filled a power vacuum, as in the West, but because it was fully integrated into the remaining, powerful Roman state. Byzantine Christianity, or Orthodoxy, became a highly intellectual, ceremonial, and stable state religion, serving as the ideological core of the empire. This strong connection to a centralized state ensured survival, but also led to its unique, imperial character, later extending its influence through missionary efforts into Slavic regions like Russia, where Byzantine culture and orthodoxy were transplanted wholesale. A third, equally dramatic, path emerged in the former Roman territories of North Africa, Egypt, and the Levant, following the rise of Islam, as previously discussed in our second topic. Within a century of the Prophet Muhammad's death, these vital Christian lands, including the ancient patriarchates of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, were absorbed into the Caliphate. Here, the Christian faith survived not through imperial patronage or papal diplomacy, but through the legal mechanism of dhimmi status. Under Islamic rule, Christians and Jews were recognized as people of the book, affording them protection, autonomy in personal legal matters, and the right to practice their faith, provided they paid a special tax, jizya, and accepted Muslim political sovereignty. The churches, though sometimes facing restrictions, continued to operate. Faith survived under a different political system, adapting to the constraints of Muslim administration. It was a model of religious coexistence, albeit under clear hierarchy, that preserve the ancient Christian communities that exist in the Middle East even today. The survival of faith after the Roman collapse was thus a story of extraordinary institutional resilience and strategic adaptation. 1. In the West, the Church, Papacy, and monasteries became the new political and cultural anchor, successfully converting and cooperating with the Germanic successor kingdoms. 2. In the East, the Orthodox Church preserved its power through its association with the unbroken Roman imperial authority, Byzantium. 3. In the South, ancient Christian communities survived through negotiated coexistence under the new, tolerant, yet dominant Islamic caliphates. The Church, in its various forms, proved itself to be more flexible, better organized, and more enduring than the Roman Empire itself. When the political structure dissolved, faith provided the essential scaffolding for the rebuilding of Western civilization, preserving literacy, law, and a shared moral framework that transcended national borders. The fall of Rome was not the end of faith. It was its most profound transformation. If this deep analysis of resilience and adaptation, which required the Church to simultaneously be a monastery, a diplomatic corps, and a civil administrator, taught you something new, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of historical turning points. Thank you for staying with us.